The question that I received was, do you ever use hard clipping or hard clippers? And if so, where do you use it? And we do talk about loudness a ton on this channel and in some of my other projects, because really for modern music, especially for like forms of EDM or even like rock or metal music, once you actually have the tune and you have the parts, loudness is something that you're always thinking about, perceived loudness, and trying to be competitive with all the other stuff that you're hearing. And clipping is one form of that. Now, I thought about that question for a little while and I realized, no, I never intentionally do bring on a hard clipper. The only like hard clipper I even know of that I have in my arsenal is this TDR limiter. Now, there's a lot of processors that apply forms of hard clipping, and you just may not be aware of it because it's not called that. But at the end of the day, the important thing to always remember is that there are so many means to your ends in music production, specifically with like processing and processors. So using clippers, using hard clippers is certainly viable if it's getting you the sound that you want. Typically, you're bringing on a clipper to try and maintain as much of the snap and punch through and drive of your source signal. So maybe you have like a metal guitar, or in our case here, we have a snap or a snare sound. You're trying to bring up the perceived loudness, but you don't want to lose any of that drive. Like that's where the hard clipper comes into play, because it's giving you kind of that quote unquote nasty distortion. But if your signal is already super snappy and super punchy and you're doing your clipping, you may not want to lose that. You don't want to lose that element when you're bringing on, like, let's say more of a transparent peak limiter, for example. And this will be our first example with the snap, and it will probably just be better heard than explained. So let's actually turn off the clipper first, and let's listen to our sound. Okay, we can hear that like so. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna use our final output stage, our final true peak limiter, which is supposed to be pretty transparent. And I'm going to apply that to this signal, and we're gonna be coming out at -6. We shouldn't be any louder than that. And we're gonna drive in pretty hard. Let's just drive it all the way up. Okay. And on. So someone like me would probably do something like this. I would use more of a processor in this style if I was trying to clip off the peaks and just bring up the overall perceived loudness. That would likely be my approach. Is it the right approach? Is it the wrong approach? All depends on the scenario and the situation. So we're going to bring that back down. We're going to bring this back up so that we're not really doing anything whatsoever at that final output stage. And instead, we're going to now bring on the clipper. And this clipper has a lot of different modes. We're really not going to go over it. This isn't meant to be a tutorial on this clipper. So we're going to try to keep it mostly in like a hard clipping mode. But there is the version to kind of go in here and do mid-side. And you can obviously check out the manual for this plugin if you want more information. But we're just going to go very standard here and work with our threshold and our like drive control. And maybe we'll listen to the different modes, but these are actually modes that are trying to make the effect more transparent, which isn't necessarily what we're going for in this example. If I wanted something more transparent, I'd probably use a different processor. Okay, so let's go ahead here and we'll bring our threshold to -6, just like we had it before, and we're going to start to drive in. And notice that right now we're seeing one of those meters moving more than the other. That's because we are working in a stereo mode. That's what this icon means. So that's why those are going to be moving at different points. And I intentionally emphasized it just to show you that here. Okay, so you can hear already, especially with that top end, it's much sort of like, I don't want to say clickier, but you can actually kind of hear the ear bleed that comes in from using it. We can try to increase separation, which is kind of more of a multi-band effect here happening. See if that helps at all with that. Does a little bit. Again, listen to that really high-end part. And that's going to tone that down a little. Okay, we can listen to this on and off. So for a sound and a signal like this, for increasing perceived loudness, keeping punch, this would likely be a good solution for you. Can you achieve this exact same sound using other processors? You absolutely can. But this is kind of the most obvious and logical place to apply a clipper to, because we're still coming out here around minus 5.6, which is fine. And we could obviously compensate for that. If I turn this off, where are we coming out? So we've added like a tiny bit of gain, but we could compensate for that very easily here at the output stage. Needless to say, this is a very obvious and logical place to apply your clipper, and you even could do mid-side if you wanted to like really crush the mids with the clipper and leave the sides alone. Just some food for thought here. We can listen to the other modes here. I believe this is going to bring up the actual peak gain. And I'd probably prefer the open mode, and then I would look to, again, compensate for gain at the final output stage. But this is coming back to the point where if I'm doing that, I'm likely going to be using a different kind of processor. And here's our next example with that little clip of music that I use all the time to demonstrate, especially things with loudness and like mix bus processing. And we can see the peak control is actually already pretty good. There's not this huge separation between the peaks and what's going on more in like the RMSy level of this signal. And would I use a clipper on this? Probably not, unless I was looking at the audio file and I was hearing with my ears like, hey, these moments, and you can even see them kind of peaking out, are really drastic. And if I know that that belongs to like percussion elements or drum elements or guitar elements, I might consider a clipper, again, if I'm trying to keep the punch. But I have to be so careful, because once it starts to dip down below that and grab other information that's not just the peak signal, it's going to sound pretty heavy on the distortion. So again, we'll start by using like our true peak thing here, turn off the clipper. And that sounds pretty good to me if I was going to try to go for something subtle, right? So now we're going to go with the clipper and listen to kind of the same thing happening. This might be a fun one to actually use the mid side, but I don't really feel like setting it up. Okay, we'll set our threshold to -6, start to drive in. Okay, so remember that that was with 11. We can match these settings really quick. Now, in really subtle doses, that might be perfect for what it's grabbing. And again, my guess is the open or the LF mode is going to sound better. We could, again, try to apply a little bit of that separation too. I usually like it around 60. And the thing you'll notice that I do in pretty much all of these examples is I'm trying to chase transparency, where that's not really the point. If we get that just right, like with the brick wall, with no separation, and are just tickling it, I think that is doing what we want it to do. It is bringing up our perceived loudness, and it's just grabbing those couple few moments where we're peaking out. here, sometimes it grabs that low end in a not so flattering way. That might be okay. But I don't like what it's doing to the low end at all. So on a full loop like this, where you already have pretty good dynamic range control as we have with this, a clipper probably isn't appropriate. Now, when you think about this particular plugin and all of the modules that you have, it wouldn't be unlikely at all for you to start with a signal that has some really high peaks and then maybe consider actually putting the clipper to the front or near the front of that chain to address that first before you go into the more transparent stuff. Okay, we're just going to run through these last couple examples where in some cases, I think it would be beneficial for you to maybe use a clipper over doing more of like a peak limity, compressor, EQ combo. Again, however you get the result that you get is fine. We have this drum loop playing, acoustic drum loop. And when you have acoustic drums, that's sometimes where hard clipping works great. So I'm just going to drive this in. We'll get a setting that we like and we'll move on to our last example. You can see we can be awfully aggressive with this. You don't really lose any of the punch from that snare at all. If anything, you almost gain punch, even though it's clipping out at that point. Perfect. So last but not least, we have our 808. And unless you're listening in headphones or you got pretty good speakers, it might be tough for you to even hear this at all until we start to drive in. So with 808s, you're always kind of looking for adding like higher harmonics so that it will cut through on any kind of a system, not just on high quality headphones, not just on systems that have a sub. So a clipper can sometimes be a good solution because that clipper is going to give you pretty grimy distortion. But let's first try to use our more transparent one, just see what we get. And there is another mode on here too. You could always try the PCM. So you can hear the kind of overtones that this is bringing in. And when you look at this signal, it's already pretty much flat like a pancake. So now let's try the clipper and just listen to the different flavors of distortion that we could potentially get. That's giving it a harder knee characteristic. Let's actually go the other way with it. We're probably peaking out a little bit higher than we need to. Oh, yeah. Got to adjust on the output stage here. Let's drive it. It's actually killing some of the sub material there. It sounds like a good flavor of distortion, but you don't want to lose the sub either. So again, figuring this out, it's tricky. It's a lot of trial and error. It's trusting your ears. It's doing all of those things. But these are some scenarios where at least trying a hard clipper might be something you'd be interested in doing. Again, to bring it all the way back to the very beginning of the video, do I intentionally go to hard clippers ever? I personally do not, but that's just a preference, and your preference might be to use it. So I thought this was a great question that was asked, because I actually thought about it for a second. Like, do I ever use hard clipping? And I was like, no, I don't. But it's still a great tool when you know what you're doing, and it could be part of your signature sound. It could be how you get to your end goal. And of course, it's completely viable. And if you have a lot of experience using clippers and where you use hard clippers, feel free to share that down in the comment section. I'd be very interested to read where people are applying these guys. And you could also tell us what your favorite clipper is. So I think there's the standard clip is the really popular one. I don't have it. I don't use it because I don't really use clippers, but I know that is a very much industry standard. So thank you for watching. I know this was a much longer video than I think even I intended, but maybe you learned a thing or two, and that's what it's all about. So I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Take care.